The first day was uneventful. The second day was very eventful, because what happened was General Rosecrans, rather than coming down and inspecting the troops and the placement of their regiments himself, allowed a staff officer, a major, to do that, who did a rather poor job of it. Meaning, he looked at the Union regiments stationed behind the row of woods, and all of a sudden he saw a gap. He wasn't smart enough to go through the woods to check to see whether there was a Union regiment filling that gap. He just assumed there was no Union regiment there. So he turned around, he went back to the right, and he told each regimental commander to move over one space to close the gap. And then he took off. In the process of moving over, either somebody didn't get the word or somebody said, well, I'm going to stay where I am because this is my spot, which created a real gap. And when Longstreet's men discovered it, Longstreet had been moved from the Army of Northern Virginia, Lee's army, by train over here for this express battle. What Longstreet did was he ordered his men to go through the gap and immediately turn left and turn right and attack all of these Union regiments and split them up, which worked, and the whole right collapsed. Now, some regiments simply retreated back towards Thomas's line, and Thomas was on the left flank, occupying the whole left flank. But most of them, well over the vast majority, simply turned and ran, Rosecrans on his horse, leading the way back to Chattanooga. And Chattanooga is on the north side of the Tennessee River, and is at the end of the Tennessee line. When Thomas saw this, what he immediately did was he did the same thing that he had done at Stones River. He collapsed the right half of his line so that it was in an inverted V, just as it had been before, with some fishhook regiments made on the end, curled around so that he could not be outflanked. And then some of the regiments that still remained that were not under his command, that formed part of the right flank, were brought in, and they were helped to fill in and close up the ranks and strengthen them. Now Thomas looked around, and he sees behind him, off to his left, over his left shoulder, Snodgrass Hill and Horseshoe Ridge on the hill. He moves his whole line, it's now U-shaped, roughly U-shaped, back towards the Snodgrass Hill, takes the hill, places them on Horseshoe Ridge, and holds out for the Confederate attack. Thomas has about 40,000 men in his ranks, or at least 40% of the Union Army, and the Confederates have about 100,000 men. In other words, they outnumbered Thomas at least 2.5 to 1. Despite that fact, the fact that they had a numerical advantage, Thomas holds them off for over 11 hours, from late in the morning until about 9 o'clock at night. And during the course of that, it's a stalemate. The Confederates are not pushing ahead, and the Union Army, or what's left of it on the battlefield, is holding them off completely. 3 o'clock in the afternoon arrives, and Thomas gets a written order from Rosecrans. You are to withdraw from the battlefield immediately and return to Chattanooga. And Thomas tells the messenger, give General Rosecrans this verbal reply. We are doing very well in this battle. We are holding our own. We can win this battle, but we need more men. Is there anything you can do to reorganize the men in Chattanooga and send them back here to give us sufficient strength so that we can win the battle? And the messenger leaves. Thomas doesn't hear from Rosecrans for another 6 hours or more. Finally, about 9:30, 10 o'clock, somewhere in there, a second messenger arrives with the same set of orders and instructions for Thomas to immediately withdraw from the battlefield. And Thomas gives the same verbal message to the messenger. Now the messenger gives another message to Thomas, and he says, General Rosecrans told me that if you were not willing to withdraw, that you should be given this verbal message. And that is that if you do not withdraw, as he has ordered you to do, you are going to subject yourself to a court-martial. Thomas knew enough about court-martials from dealing with Lee for 5 years in Texas to know that that was not the thing to do, because even if you win at a court-martial, Army tradition was that when you next came up for review, you would be dismissed from the Army. So you may win, but in the long run, you don't win, you lose. You lose your career. That is something that Thomas was not willing to do for the sake of saying, I won a battle. So he immediately withdrew. You've guessed what the Confederates did not do at Chickamauga. They weren't about to chase Thomas in the dark. Are you kidding? Because they knew that they would get plastered and that the troops would be ambushed.